Okay, so greetings, family, greetings, friends, comrades, and the like. My name is Cassandra Faye Floyd. I'm also known as the Daughter of the Fates, founder of the Temple of Evolutionary Emergence. And like I promised just a moment ago, I am back for a second reading. So, as the title implies, let's just make sure everything is the up and up here. Cool. As the greetings, everybody that's tuning in. So, as the heading implies, this is going to be a reading. It's going to be a pretty lengthy one. You hopefully you can hang out with me because I'm probably going to go ahead and just read the whole thing today. I want to have it as a reading straight through on its own because I'm going to be reading more books. I'm going to be reading more text. I'm going to be reading more like I just went. So I don't know if y'all can see. Let me see. So I just went and got all of my books out of my storage unit that have been there for quite some time. Here, let me pan around. So I've got tons and tons of books, and I just remembered how many, and that ain't even half of them. That ain't even a quarter of them that you see. But I was like, yes, this is so much material. I don't have to buy nothing else. I got all these awesome ass books that I can read, and we're going to have discussions on these. So this isn't just for your entertainment that I'm just going to read. Like, we're going to have discussions on these. I'm going to try to figure out how to get into a rhythm of taking questions and maybe even like inviting people in to facilitate these discussions because they need to be had. Otherwise, I'm going to walk around here with an attitude all the time about what the hell I'm experiencing in this city. You feel me? Anyway, so the book that I'm going to read now I want to say right out the gate, the reason that I am reading this book, it's not even a book. It is a very brief lecture made by V.I. Lenin. It is called The State. V.I. Lenin on the State. I am reading this because I want it to be known. I don't want anybody to challenge me because I have said it publicly. This reading and any other reading that I am going to be doing, because I'm going to be reading material by Karl Marx. I'm going to be reading other material by V.I. Lenin on the state, on the revolution, on the emancipation of women. All of these pieces that I've, collected over the years in my life as a revolutionary. I want to make it clear. I will make it clear at the beginning of every last one of these readings. I am doing this because these are necessary political educations that we need to get into to help you understand why. One, I am no longer a socialist / communist. I, too, believe that there has to be a different, better, and more evolved way to enter into the future. These philosophies and scientific methods were useful for their time. They are no longer relevant today, and we need to be able to say that. So not only am I no longer a socialist or a communist, I do not subscribe to capitalism either. So you ain't gonna have me jumping, into the pot, out the pot, and into the frying pan. We have to be able to clearly articulate what a sovereign future looks like for every single individual on the planet. What does it mean to be sovereign as an individual and still live in a global community? And these are the discussions that we have to have, because we're still caught in this narrative that we only have two, now maybe three options: the Green Party and the Red Party and the Blue Party, and and those few little tricklers who subscribe to communism and socialism, and global socialist revolution is the only way forward for oppressed people around the world. I reject it, and I'm gonna tell you why. And that's why I want to have these discussions. That's why I'm going to be doing these readings. Hey, J-Mo, sweetheart, friend, sister girl. Anyway, so we're going to get started. This is going to be a little more lengthy read than the one that we just did. This is V.I. Lenin, The State. I believe you can read it online. I think it's available in a PDF online. This is a lecture that he made, that he delivered on July 11th of 1919. Okay. So here we go. And you can you can, I'm looking at comments on both IG and on StreamYard. So through StreamYard, okay, so housekeeping. StreamYard does not let me know who you are if you are watching via Facebook. So if you're watching via Facebook and you make a comment, just make sure to let me know who you are so I can shout you out and thank you for tuning in. If you're tuning in from any place other than YouTube, so if you're tuning in from IG, if you're tuning in from Twitch, or if you're tuning in from Facebook, I want to encourage you to go to my YouTube channel and subscribe if you have not, to like and share if you have not, because I still need to get my subscriptions up in order to monetize my page. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to get started. This is The State by V.I. Lenin for those who are tuning in late. Comrades, according to the plan adopted by you and conveyed to me, the subject of today's talk is the state. I do not know how familiar you already are with this subject. If I am not mistaken, your courses have only just begun, and this is the first time you will be approaching this subject systematically. If that is so, then it may very well be that in the first lecture on this difficult subject, I may not succeed in making my exposition sufficiently clear and comprehensible to many of my listeners. And if this should prove to be the case, I would request you not to be perturbed by the fact, because the question of the state is a most complex and difficult one, perhaps one that more than any other has been confused by bourgeois scholars, writers, and philosophers. It should not therefore be expected that a clear understanding of this subject can be obtained from one brief talk at a first sitting. After the first talk on this subject, you should make a note of the passages which you have not understood or which are not clear to you, and return to them a second and third and fourth time, so that you have not understood. So what you have not understood may be further supplemented and elucidated afterwards by both by reading and by various lectures and talks. I hope that we may manage to meet once again, and that then we shall be able to exchange opinions on all supplementary questions and to see what has remained most unclear. I also hope that in addition to talks and lectures, you will devote some time to reading at least some of the most important works of Marx and Engels. I have no doubt that these most important works are to be found in the catalogs of literature and in the handbooks which are available in your library for the pupils of the Soviet and Party School. And although, again, some of you may at first be dismayed by the difficulty of the exposition, I must again warn you that you should not be perturbed by this fact, and that what is unclear at a first reading will become clear at a second reading, or when you subsequently approach the question from a somewhat different angle. For I once more repeat that the question is so complex and has been so deliberately confused by bourgeois scholars and writers that anybody who desires to study this question seriously and to master it independently must attack it several times, return to it again and again, and consider the question from various angles in order to attain a clear and firm understanding of it. And it will be all the easier to return to this question because it is such a fundamental, such a basic question of all politics, and because not only in such stormy and revolutionary times as the present, but even in the most peaceful times, you will come across this question every day in any newspaper in connection with any economic or political question. Every day is one connection or another. You will be returning to this question every day in one question or another. Every day in one connection or another, you will be returning to this question. What is the state? What is its nature? What is its nature? What is its significance? And what is the attitude of our party, the party that is fighting for the overthrow of capitalism, the Communist Party? What is its attitude to the state? And the chief thing is that as a result of your reading as a result of the talks and the lectures you will hear on the state, you should acquire the ability to approach this question on the most diverse occasions in connection with the most trifling questions in the most unexpected conjunctures and in discussions and disputes with opponents. Only when you learn to find your way about independently, only when you learn to find your way about independently in this question may you consider yourself sufficiently confirmed in your convictions and able with sufficient success to defend them against anybody at any time. After these brief remarks, I shall proceed to deal with the question itself. What is the state? How did it arise? And what fundamentally should be the attitude to the state of the party of the working class, which is fighting for the complete overthrow of capitalism, the Communist Party? I have already said that you will scarcely find another question which has been so confused deliberately and undeliberately by representatives of bourgeois science, philosophy, jurisprudence, political economy, and journalism as the question of the state. Listen, I'm talking to y'all about the state all the time. I hope y'all walk with me. I hope y'all can rock. This is a good piece. Walk with me. To this day, the question is very often confused with religious questions. Not only representatives of religious doctrines, it is quite natural to expect it of them, but even people who consider themselves free from religious prejudice very often confuse the specific question of the state with questions of religion and endeavor. Even people who consider themselves free from religious prejudice very often confuse the specific question of the state with questions of religion and endeavor to build up a doctrine, very often a complex one, with an ideological, philosophical approach and argumentation, which claims that the state is something divine, something supernatural, that it is a certain force by virtue of which mankind has lived and which confers on people, or which can confer on people, which brings with it something that is not of man, but is given him from without. That is a force of divine origin. And it must be said that this doctrine is so closely bound up in the interest of the exploiting classes, the landlords and the capitalists, so serves their interest, has so deeply permeated all the customs, views, and science of the gentlemen who represent the bourgeoisie, that you will meet the relics of it in every hand, even in the view of the state held by the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries, who reject with disgust the suggestion that they are under the sway of religious prejudices, are convinced that they can regard the state with sober eyes. This question has been so confused and complicated because it affects the interest of the ruling classes more than any other, yielding in this respect only to the foundations of economic science. The doctrine of the state serves as a justification of social privilege, a justification of the existence of exploitation, a justification of the existence of capitalism. And that is why it would be the greatest mistake to expect impartiality on this question, to approach this question in the belief that people who claim to be scientific can give you a purely scientific view on the subject. In the question of the state, in the doctrine of the state, in the theory of the state, when you have become familiar with this question and have gone into it sufficiently deeply, you will always discern the natural struggle of different classes, a struggle which is reflected or expressed in a conflict of views on the state, in the estimate of the role and the significance of the state itself. To approach this question as scientifically as possible, we must cast at least a fleeting glance back on the history of the rise and the development of the state. The most reliable thing in a question of social science, and one that is most necessary in order really to acquire the habit of approaching this question correctly and not allowing oneself to get lost in the mass detail or in the immense variety of conflicting opinions. The most important thing in order to approach this question scientifically is not to forget the underlying historical connection, to examine every question from the standpoint of how the given phenomena arose in history and what principal stages this phenomena passed through in its development, and from the standpoint of its development, to examine what the given thing has become today. Y'all ain't hearing. Lord have mercy. I hope that in connection with the question of the state, you will acquaint yourselves with Engels' book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. This is one of the fundamental works of modern socialism, every sentence of which can be accepted with confidence in the assurance that it has not been said at random, but is based on immense historical and political material. Undoubtedly, not all the parts of this work have been expounded in an equally popular and comprehensible way. Some of them presume a reader who already possesses a certain knowledge of history and economics. But I again repeat that you should not be perturbed if on reading this work you do not understand it all at once. That hardly happens with anyone. But returning to it later, when your interest has been aroused, you will succeed in understanding the greater part of it, if not the whole of it. I mention this book because it gives the correct approach to question in the sense mentioned. It begins with a historical sketch of the origin of the state. In order to approach this question correctly as every other question, for example, the question of the origin of capitalism, the exploitation of man by man, socialism, how socialism arose, what conditions gave rise to it, every such question can be approached soundly and confidently only if we cast a glance back on the history of its development as a whole. In connection with this question, it should first of all be noted that the state has not always existed. There was a time when there was no state. It appears wherever and whenever a division of society into classes appears, whenever exploiters and exploited appear. Before the first form of exploitation of man by man arose, the first form of division into classes, slave owners and slaves, there existed the patriarchal family, or as it is sometimes called, the clan family. We're going to have to dig into this, y'all, because this is incorrect. Clan, generation, kinship, when people lived together according to kinship and generation, was not matriarchal, by the way. It was not patriarchal, it was matriarchal. Fairly definite traces of these primitive times have survived in the life of many primitive peoples. And if you take any work whatsoever on primitive culture, so I keep stopping because we got to talk about this whole use of primitive people, primitive cultures, primitive times as the inherently racist, Eurocentristic nature of these worldviews, right? Marx, Engels, Lenin, all of their writings, no matter how much the science may appeal to people, were inherently racist, were inherently Eurocentric, were inherently, even as they talk about the withering away of the state, they were inherently oppressive. We'll talk about that when we dig into this. I'm just going to read it straight through, but I wanted to say that. And if you take any work whatsoever on primitive culture, you will always come across more or less definite descriptions, indications, and recollections of the fact that there was a time, more or less similar to primitive communism, when the division of society into slave owners and slaves did not exist. And in those times, there was no state, no special apparatus for the systematic application of force and the subjugation of people by force. It is such an apparatus that is called the state. In primitive society, when people lived in small family groups and were still at the lowest stage, the lowest stages of development, in a condition approximating to savagery, an epoch from which modern civilized human society is separated by several thousand years, there were yet no signs of existence of the state. We find the predominance of custom, authority, respect, the power enjoyed by the elders of the clan. We find this power sometimes accorded to women. The position of women then was not like the downtrodden and oppressed condition of women today. But nowhere do we find a special category of people who are set apart to rule others and for the sake and the purpose of rule systematically and permanently to wield a certain apparatus of coercion, an apparatus of violence, such as represented at the present time, as you all realize, by the armed detachments of troops, the prisons, and the other means of subjugating the will of others by force, all that which constitutes the essence of the state. If we abstract ourselves from the so-called religious teachings, subtleties, philosophical arguments, and the various opinions advanced by bourgeois scholars, if we abstract ourselves from these and try to get at the real essence of the matter, we shall find that the state really does amount to such an apparatus of rule separated out from human society. When there appears such a special group of men who are occupied with ruling and nothing else, and who in order to rule need a special apparatus of coercion and of subjugating the will of others by force, prisons, special detachments of men, armies, etc., then there appears the state. But there was a time when there was no state, when general ties, society itself, discipline, and the ordering of work were maintained by force of custom and tradition, or by the authority or the respect enjoyed by the elders of the clan or by women. Let's see. Or by women. Interesting. He repeated that twice. But anyway, who in those times not only frequently enjoyed equal status with men, but not infrequently enjoyed even higher status. And when there was no special category of persons, specialists in ruling. History shows that the state as a special apparatus for coercing people arose only wherever and whenever there appeared a division of society into classes. That is, a division into groups of people, some of whom are permanently in a position to appropriate the labor of others, where some people exploit others. The women does mean matriarchy, but again, he will not say that because he was not. That's what's complicated about these theories. I have almost all the lectures written by V.I. Lenin, by Karl Marx, the works on Karl Marx, Das Kapital, and all of this shit. And even as they talk about the role of women in revolutionary struggle and revolutionary movements and organization, they were not like pro-matriarchy. He can't even say, even when he talks about women frequently enjoying equality or even higher stations in life than men, he still never says the time when women ruled. He will not say the time when the clans were determined by the mother, not the father, by the mother's line, not by the father's line. He will never say, not once in this book does he ever say the period where the period where there was no state was the period where women had sexual full body autonomy that translated to sovereignty and rulership through the mother. He won't ever say it. he'll say, oh yeah, that time when they were savages and shit, you feel me? That time back there when they was primitives and shit, not like, intellectual like us now. Like, this is code shit, right? So, like I said, I don't want to get too far into a discussion because we're going to talk about it deeper, especially as we juxtapose the archaeological work that came out of the Great Cosmic Mother, which I read to you, right? And she talks about Karl Marx, she talks about Engels, she talks about Lenin, she talks about all these dudes, the theory of human development that was developed by Marx and by Engels, and how inherently racist and how inherently misogynistic this theory of the development of human history and the classes, right? So I don't want to get too far off in that, but yes, you are right. That's why he can't say matriarchy. All he can say is, that time back then when they were savages and shit. Okay. And this division of society into classes must always be clearly borne in mind as a fundamental fact of history. The development of all human societies for thousands of years in all countries without exception reveals a general conformity to law, a regularity, and a consistency in this development. So that at first we had a society without classes. The original, quote, he calls it the original patriarchy. Oh my God. The original patriarchal primitive society in which there were no aristocrats. Then we had a society based on slavery and a slave-owning society. Like, in his mind, this is how shit developed, which is ludicrous. The whole of modern civilized Europe has passed through this stage. Slavery ruled supreme 2,000 years ago. The vast majority of people, that's not where Europe started. The vast majority of peoples, the other parts of the world also passed through this stage. Among the less developed peoples, traces of slavery survive to this day. You will find the institution of slavery in Africa, for example, at present time. Slave owners and slaves were the first important class division. The former group not only owned all the means of production, the land and the implements, however primitive they may have been in those times, but also owned the people. This group was known as slave owners, while those who labored and supplied labor for others were known as slaves. This form was followed in history by another, feudalism. In the great majority of countries, slavery in the course of its development evolved into serfdom. The fundamental division of society was now into feudal landlords and peasant serfs. The form of relations between people changed. The slave owners had regarded the slaves as their property. The law had confirmed this view and regarded the slave as chattel, completely owned by the slave owner. As far as the peasant serf was concerned, class oppression and dependence remained, but it was not considered that the feudal landlord owned the peasants as chattel, but that he was only entitled to their labor and to compel them to perform certain services. In practice, as you know, serfdom, especially in Russia, where it survived the longest of all and assumed the grossest forms, in no way differed from slavery. Further, with the development of trade, the appearance of the world market, and the development of money circulation, a new class arose within the feudal society, the capitalist class. From the commodity, the exchange of commodities, and the rise of power, the power of money, there arose the power of capital. During the 18th century, or rather from the end of the 18th century and during the 19th century, revolutions took place all over the world. Feudalism was eliminated in all the countries of Western Europe. This took place latest of all in Russia. In 1861, a radical change took place in Russia as well, as a consequence of which one form of society was replaced by another. Feudalism was replaced by capitalism, under which division into classes remained, as well as various traces of relics of serfdom, but in which the division into classes fundamentally assumed a new form. The owners of capital, the owners of the land, the owners of the mills and the factories in all capitalist countries constituted and still constitute an insignificant minority of the population who have complete command of the labor of the whole people and consequently command, oppress, and exploit the whole mass of laborers, the majority of whom are proletarians, wage workers, that produce their livelihood in the process of production only by the sale of their own workers' hands, their own labor power. With the transition to capitalism, the peasants, who were already disunited and downtrodden in feudal times, were converted, partly the majority, into proletarians, and partly the minority into wealthy peasants, who themselves hired workers and who constituted a rural bourgeoisie. This fundamental fact, the transition of society from primitive forms of slavery to serfdom and finally to capitalism, you must always bear in mind, for only by remembering this fundamental fact, only by inserting all political doctrines into this fundamental framework, will you be able to properly appraise these doctrines and understand what they refer to. For each of these great periods in the history of mankind, slave owning shall look. Oh my God. Men cannot lead. God damn it. Anyway, slave owning, feudal, and capitalist embraces scores and hundreds of centuries and presents such a mass of political forms, such a variety of political doctrines, opinions, and revolutions, that this extreme diversity and immense variety can be understood, especially in connection with the political, philosophical, and other doctrines of bourgeois scholars and politicians, only by firmly holding as to a guiding thread to this division of society into classes, this change in the form of class rule, and from this standpoint examining all social questions, economic, political, spiritual, religious, etc. If you examine the state from the standpoint of this fundamental division, you will find that before From this fundamental division, you will find that before the division of society into classes, as I have already said, no state existed. But as the social division into classes arose and took firm root, as class society arose, the state also arose and took firm root. The history of mankind knows scores and hundreds of countries that have passed through or are still passing through slavery, feudalism, and capitalism. In each of these countries, despite the immense historical changes that have taken place, despite all the political vicissitudes and all the revolutions associated with this development of mankind in the transition from slavery through feudalism to capitalism, and to the present worldwide struggle against capitalism, you will always discern the rise of the state. It has always been a certain apparatus which separated out from society and consisted a group of people engaged solely or almost solely or mainly in ruling. Those who rise above, in ruling, people are divided into ruled and into specialists in ruling. Those who rise above society and are called rulers, representatives of the state. This apparatus, this group of people who rule others, always takes possession of certain apparatuses of coercion, of physical force, irrespective of whether this violence over people is expressed in the primitive club or in the epoch of slavery, in more perfected types of weapons, or in the firearms which appeared in the Middle Ages, or finally in the modern weapons, which in the 20th century are marvels of technique and are entirely based on the latest achievements of modern technology. The methods of violence changed, but whenever there was a state, there existed in every society a group of persons who ruled, who commanded, who dominated, who commanded, who dominated, and who, in order to maintain their power, possessed an apparatus of physical coercion, an apparatus of violence with those weapons which corresponded to the technological level of the given epoch. And by examining these general phenomena, by asking ourselves why no state existed when there were no classes, when there were no exploiters and exploited, and why it arose when classes arose, only in this way shall we find a definite answer to the question of the essence of the state and its significance. The state is a machine for maintaining the rule of one class over another. When there were no classes in society, when before the epoch of slavery, people labored in primitive conditions of greater equality and conditions when productivity of labor was still at its lowest, and when primitive man could barely procure the wherewithal for the crudest and most primitive existence. Oh my God, this shit is madness. Oh my God. Woo! Child. We got to examine this shit. Oh, he could barely procure the wherewithal for the crudest and most primitive existence. A special group of people, specially separated off to rule and dominate over the rest of society, had not yet arisen and could not have arisen. Only when the first form of division of society into classes appeared, only when slavery appeared, when a certain class of people, by concentrating on the crudest forms of agricultural labor, could produce a certain surplus, when this surplus was not obviously essential for the most wretched existence of the slave and passed into the hands of the slave owner, when in this way the existence of this class of slave owners took firm root, then in order that it might take firm root, it was essential that a state should appear. Y'all ain't heard? And it did appear. The slave owning state, an apparatus which gave the slave owners power and enabled them to rule over the slaves. Both society and the state were then much smaller than they are now. They possessed an incomparably weaker apparatus of communication. The modern means of communication did not exist then. Mountains, rivers, and seas were immeasurably greater obstacles than they are now, and the formation of the state was confined within far narrower geographical boundaries. A technically weak state apparatus served a state confined within relatively narrow boundaries and a narrow circle of action. Nevertheless, there did exist an apparatus which compelled the slaves to remain in slavery. Which kept one part of society subjugated to and oppressed by another. It is impossible to compel the greater part of society to work systematically for the other part of society without a permanent apparatus of coercion. Okay? Y'all ain't heard? It is impossible to compel the greater part of society to work systematically for the other part of society without a permanent apparatus of coercion. So long as there were no classes, there was no apparatus like this. When classes appeared everywhere and always, as this division grew and took firmer hold, there also appeared a special institution, the state. The forms of the state were extremely varied. During the period of slavery, we already find diverse forms of the state in the most advanced, cultured, and civilized countries according to the standards of the time. For example, in ancient Greece and Rome, which rested entirely on slavery. At the time, the difference was already arising between the monarchy and the republic, between the aristocracy and the democracy. A monarchy is the power of a single person. A republic is the absence of any non-elected power. An aristocracy is the power of a relatively small minority. A democracy is the power of the people. Democracy in Greek literally means power of the people. All these differences arose in the epoch of slavery. Despite these differences, the state of the slave-owning epoch was a slave-owning state. Irrespective of what, listen, y'all. Oh my God. He said, look, Greece and Rome went through all the changes. Huh? At the time, the difference was between the monarchy and the republic, between the aristocracy and the democracy. A monarchy is the power of a single person. A republic is the absence of any non-elected power. An aristocracy is the power of a relatively small minority. A democracy is supposed to be what? The power of the people. Democracy in Greek literally means the power of the people. All of these differences arose in the epoch of slavery. What does that mean? That you can still have a democracy and still have slavery. Oh, you can still have an aristocracy and still have slavery. You can still have a monarchy and still have. Listen, he said, despite all of these differences occurring in Greece and Rome, the state of the slave owning epoch was a slave owning state. Irrespective of whether it was a monarchy or a republic, or whether it was aristocratic or democratic, it was a slave owning state. Shit. And we act confused about what it is we witnessing in the United States of America, about what we have been experiencing as people of color and poor people in this country. This is still a slave owning state, regardless of the change of hands of power. Child, anyway. Listen, that's big. That's probably the biggest thing I've read so far today. Shit. In every course on the history of ancient times, when hearing a lecture on this subject, you will hear about the struggle which was waged between the monarchical and the republican states. But the fundamental fact is that the slaves were not regarded as human beings. Not only were they not regarded as citizens, they were not even regarded as human beings. Roman law regarded them as chattel. The law of manslaughter, not to mention the other laws for the protection of the person, did not extend to slaves. It defended only the slave owners, who were alone recognized as citizens with full rights. But whether a monarchy was instituted or a republic, it was a monarchy of slave owners, or a republic of slave owners, or a democracy of slave owners. All rights under them were enjoyed by the slave owners, while the slave was a chattel in the eyes of the law. And not only could any sort of violence be perpetrated against the slave, but even the murder of a slave was not considered a crime. Now, I want to stop for a minute. I said I wasn't going to do no discussion, but can we just recognize what it is that we are engaged in, where we live, what we are involved in, and no matter how pretty that shit look on paper, that this is what we are, this is the world that we live in the United States of America, that black people in particular and brown and red people are still the slave class of this United States, that when we have to wage campaign every 2 weeks on how some black life matters, on how some brown body matters, about how some native person, some native woman, some missing and murdered indigenous woman, her life, her existence mattered. It means that even though they say you a citizen, even though they say that on paper you count, your vote count and shit like that, the laws are not exemplary. The laws do not demonstrate that you are a citizen who enjoys the full benefits of what America claims to be. But all you got to do is say some pretty words and get people's heartstrings invested in this bullshit. And we go along with the get along. But nothing in our daily lives. No matter how many times we go the fuck out and vote, we vote and vote and vote and vote and vote. These motherfuckers pull rights from you any which way they can. Here, affirmative action, is under fire. You feel me? Is under assault. Last year it was goddamn your ability as a woman to have total sovereignty over your goddamn body. Hell, women still aren't considered equal citizens in the United States. There ain't no legislation on the books nowhere in the United States that say women are equals to men in this goddamn country and entitled to equal rights and benefits and wages for labor. Right now, today in the United States, supposedly the most progressive motherfucker on the planet, we still are not even equal to men. legislatively speaking, in this country. So we act brand new when they turn around and take away our rights to healthy, safe medical procedures called abortions. But we hadn't even been considered equal citizens yet. If we was considered equal citizens, it would be a non-issue, because these would be decisions that women would be making. We would not be sending to a fucking panel of predominantly men to be making a decision on this shit. It would be women making these determinations about our quality of life, about our quality of well-being. But to understand what it is what we are experiencing, quote, issue by issue by issue, the way we go into shit. Exactly. Same-sex couples aren't don't have, or their rights are being denied. But your Negro Clarence Thomas said it 2 years ago. He said, "Just wait, y'all mad about this abortion shit? We getting ready to undo anything that has even remotely looked progressive in the last 100 years. So buckle the fuck up." He said it. He said, y'all mad about abortion? Get ready, because we coming after every motherfucking thing. We coming after same-sex marriage. We coming after same-sex couples' ability to they just talking about reinstituting Jim Crow laws in motherfucking Mississippi in 2020 to fuck 3. God damn it. This is happening in real time, and we still stuck on stupid. This is happening under y'all president, by the way. This is happening under your boy. But let me go ahead and make this digression. This is happening under your boy. Your boy, I'm talking about Biden. Your boy and his negress sidekick, criminals that they are, you understand? Biden ain't never not been a criminal. Biden has been directly responsible for the suffering of Africans since he was with Clinton in the 90s. You understand? The attacks on African women under Biden, under Biden's watch, with the 3-strike laws, which increased the incarceration of African women, I think like 400% in the 90s. He did that. He drafted that. The 1-strike laws of public housing, which rendered all these women with children homeless. He did that. He's always been a fucking criminal. And so these motherfuckers don't ever have to provide any evidence of, quote, they've changed or anything like that. All they got to do is say some slick shit out the side of their motherfucking mouth, and y'all will go give them your vote, not demand anything of them. No reparations, no reciprocity, no nothing. And then wonder why, for the second time in the history of this country, the president of the United States is a Catholic. It matters. Because at the same time that his ass is a Catholic, sitting as the sitting president of the United States, only been 2, Kennedy was the other one. At the same time that happened, the Supreme Court, I read this, I subscribe to the Roman Catholic newsletter, because I need to know from the horse's mouth what these bastards are up to. For the first time in the history of this country, the majority of justices on the goddamn Supreme Court are devout Catholics. For the first time in the history of this country. And you don't think that is directly tied to these decisions on abortion, on gay rights, on affirmative action? You don't think there's a correlation between the fact that the majority of the justices on the Supreme Court, for the first time in the history of this country, are practicing devout Catholics? One went to school to become a Jesuit priest. That your president that y'all was so gung-ho on running the fuck out to vote for is a devout Catholic. That Nancy Pelosi is a devout Catholic. And you don't think that the biggest slave-owning institution in the history of the world, which is the Roman Catholic Church, is influencing policy in the United States right now? Y'all playing games. Y'all play too much. And just so you know, it's always been the plan, because the word America contrary to what you believe about it was named after some Italian, America's Vespucci or whatever the fuck his name was. The word America in Latin literally means to work. This shit was built as a slave state. It's been maintained as a slave state, has been intended to exist forever as a slave state. Anyway, so let's see. But whether a monarchy was instituted or a republic, it was a monarchy of slave owners, or a republic of slave owners, or a democracy of slave owners. All rights under them were enjoyed by the slave owners, while the slave was a chattel in the eyes of the law. Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. In the eyes of law. And not only could any sort of violence be perpetrated against a slave, which we witness every day here. That's why we have to have Black Lives Matter, because we witness every day here that Black people's lives do not matter in the eyes of the law. That's why crimes can be committed against brown people and red people and Black people, and we can't get no justice in the system, though we go begging at the feet of jurisprudence, the judges, the courts for justice, and can't get no justice, is because we are not entitled to any rights that the law is bound to acknowledge. Right? So it says, not only could any sort of violence be perpetrated against the slave, but even the murder of a slave was not considered a crime. So anyway, slave-owning republics differed in their internal organization. There were aristocratic republics and there were democratic republics. In an aristocratic republic, a small number of privileged persons took part in the elections. Oh, well, what does that sound like? Or let's go on. Took part in the elections. In a democratic republic, everybody took. This is where we at. Everybody took part in the elections. Let's see. In a democratic republic, everybody took part in the elections. But again, even the slaves. But again, only the slave owners. Who are the slave owners today? Fucking corporations. There's only the slave owners. Everybody except the slaves. Okay, so now they're saying only everybody got to vote then except the slaves. We get to vote. Well, even then, some of us don't even. What is it? A third of Black people have lost their right to vote. So we can keep going. This fundamental fact must be borne in mind because it throws more light than any other on the question of the state and clearly demonstrates the nature of the state. The state is a machine for the oppression of one class by another, a machine for holding in obedience to one class other subordinate classes. There are various forms of this machine. In the slave-owning state, we had a monarchy, an aristocratic republic, or even a democratic republic. In fact, the forms of government varied extremely, but their essence was always the same. The slaves enjoyed no rights and constituted an oppressed class. Listen, he's saying, you understand that even in a democratic republic, slavery existed. In the various forms, in fact, the various forms of government, the forms of government varied extremely, but their essence was always the same. Baby, we need slavery to make this bitch run. The slaves enjoyed no rights and constituted an oppressed class. They were not regarded as human beings. We find the same thing in the feudal state. The change in the form of exploitation transformed the slave-owning state into the feudal state. This was of immense importance. In slave-owning society, the slave enjoys no rights whatever and is not regarded as a human being. In feudal society, the peasant is tied to the soil. The chief token of serfdom was that the peasants, and at the time the peasants constituted the majority, there was a very poorly developed urban population. The peasants were considered attached to the land, hence the very concept of serfdom. Are we living in a modern day serfdom now? Have me prove it. Aren't we living in modern feudalism now, modern serfdom now, where every year after your lease is up because the landlord want to jack up the motherfucking rent, you got to, in crisis, figure out where the fuck you gonna move next, how you gonna live, people having to move, people being forced on month-to-month leases so that the landlords can put them out anytime they want to, and they have no recourse. We're more mobile now, and in terms of serfdom, than we ever have been in developed history. Right now, in this country, in the United States, right? The peasant might work a definite number of days for himself on the plot assigned to him by the landlord. On the other days, the peasant serf worked for his lord. The essence of class society remained. Society was based on class exploitation. Only the landlords could enjoy full rights. The peasants had no rights at all. In practice, their condition differed very little from the condition of slaves in slave-owning states. Nevertheless, a wider road was open for their emancipation, for the emancipation of the peasants. Since the peasant serf was not regarded as the direct property of the landlord, he could work part of his time on his own plot, could, so to speak, belong to himself to a certain extent. And with the wider opportunities for development of exchange and trade relations, the feudal system steadily disintegrated and the scope of emancipation of the peasantry steadily widened. The feudal society was always more complex than slave society. There was a greater element of development of trade and industry, which even in those days led to capitalism. In the Middle Ages, feudalism predominated. And here too, the forms of state varied. Here too, we find both the monarchy and the republic, although the latter was much more weakly expressed. But always the feudal landlord was regarded as the only ruler. The peasant serfs were absolutely excluded from all political rights. What does that sound like? Sharecropping of the early 1900s. Are y'all seeing a repetition occurring in this very brief assessment of the state, of the history of the state, of the development, the birth of the state? Anyway, both under slavery and under feudal system, a small minority of people could not dominate over the vast majority without coercion. History is full of the constant attempts of the oppressed classes. Listen, clean your ears, cut off everything. Listen to what I'm about to tell you, okay? Both under slavery and under feudal system, a small minority of people could not dominate over the vast majority without the system of coercion. History is full of the constant attempts of the oppressed classes to throw off oppression. The history of slavery contains records of wars of emancipation from slavery, which lasted for decades. Incidentally, the name Spartacusist, now adopted by the German communists, the only German party which is fighting the yoke of communism, was adopted by them because Spartacus was one of the most prominent heroes of one of the greatest revolts of slaves, which took place about 2,000 years ago. For many years, the seemingly omnipotent Roman Empire, which rested entirely on slavery, experienced shocks and blows under the impact of a vast uprising of slaves who armed and united to form a vast army under the leadership of Spartacus. In the end, they were defeated, captured, and put to torture by the slave owners. Such civil wars marked the whole history of the existence of class society. I have just mentioned an example of the greatest of these civil wars in the epoch of slavery. The whole epoch of feudalism is likewise marked by constant uprisings of the peasants. For example, in Germany, in the Middle Ages, the struggle between the two classes, the landlords and the serfs, assumed wide dimensions and was transformed into a civil war of the peasants against the landlords. You all are familiar with similar examples of repeated uprisings of the peasants against the feudal landlords in Russia. In order to maintain their rule and to preserve their power, the landlords had to have an apparatus by which they could unite under their subjugation a vast number of people and subordinate to them to certain laws and regulations. And all these laws fundamentally amounted to one thing: the maintenance of power of the landlords over the peasant serfs. Y'all ain't hearing. This is preaching I'm doing right now, okay? And this was the feudal state, which in Russia, for example, or in quite backwards Asiatic countries where feudalism prevails to this day, it differed in form, was either republican or monarchical. Oh my God. Woo! Was either republican or monarchical. When the state was a monarchy, the rule of one person was recognized. When it was a republic, the partition of the elected representatives of the landlord society, child, was in one degree or another recognized. This was in feudal society. In feudal society, feudal societies represented a division of classes under which the vast majority, the peasant serfs, were completely subjugated to an insignificant minority, the landlords, who owned the land. The development of trade, the development of commodity exchange led to the crystallization of a new class, the capitalists. Capital arose at the close of the Middle Ages when, after the discovery of America, world trade developed enormously. When the quantity of precious metals increased, when silver and gold became the instrument of exchange, when money circulation made it possible for individuals to hold tremendous wealth, silver and gold were recognized as wealth all over the world. The economic power of the landlord class declined, and the power of the new class, the representatives of capital, developed. The reconstruction of society was such that all citizens supposedly became equal. The old, oh my God, the old division. Now he talking about white people, okay? That's all he talking about when he talking about all people became equal, right? The old division into slave owners and slaves disappeared. All were regarded as equal before the law, irrespective of what capital each owned. Whether he owned land as private property or whether he was a starveling who owned nothing but his labor power, all were equal before the law. The law protects everybody equally. It protects the property of those who have it from attack by the masses who possessing no property, possessing nothing but their labor power, grew steadily impoverished and ruined and become converted into proletarians. Such is capitalist society. I cannot dwell on it in detail. You will return to this question when you come to discuss the program of the party. You will then hear a description of capitalist society. The society advanced against serfdom, against the old feudal system, under the slogan of liberty. But it was liberty for those who owned property. It was liberty for those who owned property. When feudalism was shattered, which occurred at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. In Russia, it occurred later than in any other country in 1861. The feudal state was then superseded by the capitalist state, which proclaims liberty for the whole people as its slogan, which declares that it expresses the will of the whole people and denies that it is a class state. And here there developed a struggle between the socialists, who are fighting for the liberty of the whole people, and the capitalist state, a struggle which has now led to the creation of the Soviet Socialist Republic and which embraces the whole world. To understand the struggle that has been started against world capital, to understand the essence of capitalist state, we must remember that when the capitalist state advanced against the feudal state, it entered the fight under the slogan of liberty. The abolition of feudalism meant liberty for the representatives of the capitalist state. Child, listen. And served their purpose, inasmuch as serfdom was breaking down and the peasants had acquired the opportunity for owning as their full property the land which they had purchased for compensation or in part by quit rent. This did not concern the state. It protected property no matter how it arose, because the state rested on private property. The peasants became private owners in all the modern civilized states. Even when the landlord surrendered part of his land to the peasant, the state protected private property, rewarding the landlord by compensation, sale for money. The state, as it were, declared that it would fully preserve private property, and it accorded to every support and protection. The state recognized the property rights of every merchant, industrialist, and manufacturer. And this society, based on private property, on the power of capital, on the complete subjection of the propertyless workers and laboring masses of the peasantry, proclaimed that its rule was based on liberty. Y'all ain't heard what I just said. Y'all ain't heard what he just said. The state recognized the property rights of every merchant, industrialist, and manufacturer. Basically, he was saying the state was about the preservation of private property. That's what the capitalist state was about: the preservation and the supporting and the support of private property, right? But at the end of the day, its narrative was that it was about liberty. The proclamation was about its rule being based on liberty, but what it was based on was the protection of private property. But it used narrative to incite the imagination of people. Combating feudalism, it proclaimed freedom of property and was particularly proud of the fact that the state had supposedly ceased to be a class state. Yet the state continued to be a machine which helped the capitalists to hold the poor peasants and the working class in subjugation. But in outward appearance, like I just said, it was free. This is important. It proclaimed universal suffrage and declared through its champions and preachers and scholars and philosophers that it was not a class state at all. Even now, when the Soviet socialist republics have begun to fight it, they accuse us of violating liberty, of building a state based on coercion, on the suppression of some by others, whereas they represent a popular democratic state. And now, when the world socialist revolution has begun, and just when the revolution has succeeded in some countries, when the fight against world capital has grown particularly acute, this question of the state has acquired the greatest importance and has become, one might say, the most burning one, the focus of all political questions and of all political disputes of present day. Whatever party we take in Russia or in any of the more civilized countries, we find that nearly all political disputes, disagreements, and opinions now center around the conception of the state. Baby. This is in 1919, by the way. He delivered this speech in 1919. Child. It is the state in a capitalist country, in a democratic republic, especially one like Switzerland or America, in the freest democratic republics, an expression of the popular will, the sum of the total general decision of the people, the expression of the national will, and so forth? Or is the state a machine that enables capitalists of those given countries to maintain their power over the working class and the peasantry and poor of that society? That is the fundamental question around which all political disputes all over the world now center. What do they say about Bolshevism? The bourgeois press abuses the Bolsheviks. You will not find a single newspaper that does not repeat the hackneyed accusation that the Bolsheviks violate popular rule. If our Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries, in their simplicity of heart, perhaps it is not simplicity, or perhaps it is simplicity, which the proverb says is worse than robbery, think that they discovered and invented the accusation that the Bolsheviks had violated liberty and popular rule. They are ludicrously mistaken. Today, not a single one of the richest newspapers in the richest countries, which spend tens of millions on their distribution and disseminate bourgeois lies and imperialist policy in tens of millions of copies. There is not one of these newspapers which does not repeat these basic arguments and accusations against Bolshevism, namely that America, England, and Switzerland are advanced states based on popular rule, whereas the Bolshevik Republic is a state of bandits in which liberty is unknown, and that the Bolsheviks have violated the idea of popular rule and have even gone so far as to disperse the Constituent Assembly. These terrible accusations against the Bolsheviks are repeated all over the world. These accusations bring us fully up against the question, what is the state? In order to understand these accusations, in order to examine them and have a fully intelligent attitude towards them, and not to examine them on hearsay, but with a firm opinion of our own, we must have a clear idea of what the state is. Here we have capitalist states in every kind and all the theories and defense of them which were created before the war. In order to answer the question properly, we must critically examine all these theories and views. I've already advised you. I'm going to go ahead and finish this. I've already advised you to turn for help to Engels' book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. This book says that every state in which private ownership of the land and the means of production exists, in which capital dominates, however democratic it may be, however democratic it may be, and I would say it may appear, is a capitalist state, a machine used by the capitalists to keep the working class and the poor peasants in subjugation, while universal suffrage, a constituent assembly, parliament, are merely a sort of promissory note which does not alter the essence of the matter. The forms of domination of the state may vary. Capital manifests its power in one way where one form exists, and in another way where another form exists. But essentially, the power is in the hands of capital, whether there are voting qualifications or not, whether the republic is a democratic one or not. In fact, the more democratic it is, the cruder and more cynical is the rule of capitalism. One of the most democratic republics in the world is the United States of America, yet nowhere, and those who were there after 1905 probably know it, yet nowhere is the power of capital, the power of a handful of billionaires over the whole society, so crude and so openly corrupt as in America. Once capital exists, it dominates the whole of society, and no democratic republic, no form of franchise can alter the essence of the matter. The democratic republic and universal suffrage were an immense progressive advance on feudalism. They had enabled the proletariat to achieve its present unity and solidarity, to form those firm and disciplined ranks which are waging a systematic struggle against capital. There was nothing even approximately resembling this. Listen, oh my God. There was nothing even approximately resembling this among the peasant serfs, not to speak of the slaves. The slaves, as we know, revolted, rioted, started civil wars, but they could never create a class-conscious majority and parties to lead the struggle. Oh, Oh. They could not clearly realize what they were aiming for in their revolting, rioting, and the starting of civil wars. And even in the most revolutionary moments of history, they were always pawns in the hands of the ruling classes. The bourgeois republic, parliament, universal suffrage all represent great progress from the standpoint of the world development of society. Mankind moved towards capitalism, and it was capitalism alone which, thanks to urban culture, enabled the oppressed proletarian class to learn to know itself and to create the world working class movement. The millions of workers organized all over the world into parties, so the socialist parties, which are consciously leading the struggle of the masses. Without parliamentarianism, without an electoral system, this development of the working class would have been impossible. That is why all these things have acquired such great importance in the eyes of the broad masses of the people. Oh, that is why a radical change seems to be so difficult. Oh my God. This is why a radical change seems to be so difficult. It is not only the conscious hypocrites, scientists, and priests that uphold and defend the bourgeois lie that the state is free and that it is its mission to defend the interests of all. So also do a large number of people who sincerely adhere to the old prejudices and who cannot understand the transition from the old capitalist society to socialism. It is not only people who are directly dependent on the bourgeoisie, not only those who are oppressed by the yoke of capital or who have been bribed by capital. There are a large number of all sorts of scientists and artists and priests, etc., in service to capital. But even people who are simply under the sway of the prejudice of bourgeois liberty that have taken up arms against Bolshevism all over the world because of the fact that when it was founded, the Soviet Republic rejected these bourgeois lies and openly declared, you say your state is free, whereas in reality, as long as there is private property, your state, even if it is a democratic republic, is nothing but a machine used by the capitalists to suppress the workers. And the freer the state, the more clearly this is expressed. The freer the state, the more clearly this is expressed. Child, y'all ain't hearing. Examples of this are in Switzerland, in Europe, in the United States, in the Americas. Nowhere does capital rule so cynically, so ruthlessly, and nowhere is this so clearly apparent as in these countries. Although they are democratic republics, no matter how finely they are painted, notwithstanding all the talk about labor democracy and the equality of all citizens. The fact is that in Switzerland and in America, capital dominates, and every attempt of the workers to achieve even the slightest real improvement in their condition is immediately met by civil war. There are fewer soldiers, a smaller standing army in these countries. Switzerland has a militia, and every Swiss has a gun at home, while in America, there was no standing army until quite recently. And so when there is a strike, the bourgeois arms, hires soldiery, and suppresses the strike. And nowhere is this suppression of the working class movement accompanied by such ruthless severity as in Switzerland and in the United States of America. As nowhere does the influence of capital in parliament manifest itself as powerfully as in these countries. The power of capital is everything. The stock exchange is everything. While parliament and elections are marionettes, puppets. But the eyes of the workers are being opened more and more, and the idea of the Soviet government is spreading wider and wider, especially after the bloody carnage through which we have just passed. The necessity for a relentless war on the capitalist is becoming clearer and clearer to the working class. whatever guise a republic may assume, even the most democratic republic, if it is a bourgeois republic, if it retains private ownership of the land, mills, and factories, and if private capital keeps the whole of society in wage slavery, that is, if it does not carry out what is proclaimed in the program of our party and in the communist and in the Soviet constitution, then this state is a machine for the suppression of some people by others. And we shall place this machine in the hands of the class that is to overthrow the power of capital. We shall reject all old prejudices about the state, meaning universal equality, for that is a fraud. As long as there is exploitation, there cannot be equality. Come on and tell the truth. The landlord cannot be the equal of the worker, or the hungry man the equal of the full man. The proletariat, listen, okay? Listen. We shall reject all old prejudices about the state, meaning some kind of universal equality, for that is a fraud. That is a fraud. As long as there is exploitation, there cannot be equality. The landlord cannot be the equal of the worker, or the hungry man the equal of the full man. The proletariat casts aside the machine which was called the state, and before which people bowed in superstitious awe, believing the old tales that it means popular rule. The proletariat casts aside this machine and declares that it is the bourgeois lie. We have deprived the capitalist of this machine and have taken it over. With this machine or bludgeon, we shall destroy all exploitation. And when the possibility of exploitation no longer exists anywhere in the world, when there are no longer owners of land and owners of factories, and when there is no longer a situation in which some gorge while others starve, only when the possibility of this no longer exists shall we co-sign this machine to the scrap heap. Then there will be no state and no exploitation. Such is the view of the Communist Party. I hope that we shall return to this subject in subsequent lectures and return to it again and again. That, my dears, is the end of the lecture delivered by V.I. Lenin on July 11th of 1919 on the question of the state. And baby, it is the question of the day. It remains the question of the day. And even when I'm talking to you about spirituality, I am always talking about the goddamn state. Okay? This is the most wicked institution ever to emerge in all of human history, child. And it's the issue of the day. It remains the issue of the day. And I'll say this before closing out. It also is completely relevant to the previous reading that I did on by Malana Karenga, Black Art, Mute Matter given force and function. Directly related. Because, you know, in his estimation, your art is only doing one or two things. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's only doing one of two things. It is serving the interest of the capitalist, or it is serving the interest of the masses. That's it. That's all. Now, if you want to take what this dude was saying in 1969, Malana Karenga, or what this dude was saying in 1919, V.I. Lenin, about the instrument of the state, these apparatuses, violent apparatuses of coercion, and you want to place the art produced by the oppressed class within the context of the two, like what's his name? Professor Griff, you know, was doing this. He was on the speaking circuit for a long time, doing, you know, his whole thing on the Illuminati takeover of hip hop, right? This is a function of the state. This is a part of the violent, coercive apparatus of the goddamn state. When you're talking about the Illuminati takeover of hip hop, this is a function of the state. When you want to talk about why it is, when people want to complain about, quote, black, what do they call it out here? Black trauma porn, talking about the fact that black people can't be cast in shit other than goddamn slave movies, or movies about us killing each other in the hood, or movies about us being terrible romantic partners. All our relationships are fucked up, down, all around. This is I'm just telling you, this is an aspect of the violent, coercive apparatus called the state. Like, he may not have understood that in 1919, but as we develop technologically, these technologies become an instrument through which the state creates in us police in our own consciousness. Antisocial behavior. Listen, don't even get me started. Media is I used to say media is the nonviolent arm of the state. It's not. It is a violent arm of the state, because media convinces us through conditioning, which it does, to engage in behavior that is self-destructive, that is destructive of others that look like us or are in the same positions as us, that condition us not to have revolutionary or evolutionary responses to the world around us. What did Karanga say? He said, what is art anyway? What is black art? What does black art have to do? Right? What's the first thing he said? He said, so what then? What is the use of art? Our art, black art. Black art must do what? What I say black art must do? It must expose the enemy. It must praise the people, and it must support the revolution. So now, if you're looking at your favorite artists these days, is their art doing any of those things? Is their art uplifting or praising the people? He said let's see. I ain't gonna go back into that because I wanted to keep it at the state. I'm gonna keep it at the state. I'm gonna end this since the reading is over. It didn't take as long as I thought, so that's good. And then I'm going to take a lunch break, and then I'm going to come back at 1, where I'm going to talk about the topic at hand today, which is the question of black erasure, especially as I am experiencing that bullshit in the city of Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles, which is responsible for the global worldview of how others perceive anything progressive, anything black culture, all the images that the whole globe has come to understand about the black experience comes through the lens of this city I live right down the street from. I live right down the street from Hollywood Boulevard. I live right down the street from the Hollywood Walk and the Chinese Theater. These are the crafters of the images that the world has about who we are and our significance here in this country. So it is interesting how stark black erasure exists. Black erasure is in the city. It is extraordinarily concerning, damn near scary, how complicit all others are in the fucking erasure of black people in this city. This is what I'm going to talk about at 1 o'clock. So rejoin me at 1 o'clock. I see your questions, sister Allah, Nura Allah. I see your questions. I wanted to try to keep this at a reading, but we are going to discuss these things. So what I'll probably do is another live tomorrow where I will revisit this piece, black art, mute matter, given force and function, or function and force. And then we have a discussion where I just answer questions. That's all we doing is like answering questions. And then I'll do another one on the state where it's just the discussion. It'll be promoted as just a discussion. And then we will have a discussion on the state. And then maybe the same thing tomorrow with this what this thing at 1 o'clock will definitely be is a discussion. So your questions, any questions that you have about what I'm experiencing as Black erasure in the city of LA, that will be happening as a full-on discussion where I'll actually be going through your comments, reading your comments, and answering your questions. That's at 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So in about 55 minutes. That's where we'll have an open discussion. I want to try to keep these as brief as possible on the reading, so when people come, they can just hear the read. So I appreciate you, Letitia. I appreciate you, Nura Allah. Let's see who else has been tuning in. Okay. All those tuning in from IG. I see Che Black on the feed. I see my homeboy Frank on the feed, and others I do not know, but I'm so grateful. My homegirl J-Lo, who I went to medical school with, she on the feed. J-Mo. I hope I didn't say J-Lo. J-Mo. I call her J-Mo. So everybody that tuned in via IG, thank you so much. Again, check out my YouTube channel, which is also Daughter of the Fates, like you see on the bottom of the screen here. I check out my YouTube channel because I still need, I think the last time I checked, I still need like 139 subscribers to be able to monetize my page. Please like, share, subscribe, encourage others to subscribe. Also, I want to encourage people on my YouTube channel to do like, you know how you can do clips of people's shit? You feel me? Do clips. If there's a soundbite in there that spoke to you in any of my videos, if there's a soundbite, if there's a 1 minute something that was like, oh shit, that was fire, clip that shit and share it, please, so I can start driving traffic to my I appreciate you too, Sister Letitia. Let's see. Not only a Black erasure in LA, but in Egypt, North Africa, probably USA, a well-revised history. Yes. I am talking about LA, but I will be talking about what that Black erasure looks like all over the place. Like I'm throwing Korea up in that joint because that's obvious. Yes, Egypt is definitely going to be in the joint today. Where else? I'm talking about LA because LA is a microcosm of the whole goddamn planet. Everybody here, everybody on Earth exist here, and that's why the freaking erasure is so gross. And I'm gonna tell y'all about two experiences that I had this weekend that were indicative of it. Okay, so anyway, again, 1 o'clock, I will be back. Let me, wet my throat, get some calories in, and I'll be back with a discussion on Black erasure, baby. This is daughter of Cassandra Faye Floyd, also known as Daughter of the Fates, founder of the Temple of Evolutionary Emergence. I'm glad people are excited about the comeback. All right, so I'll see y'all at 1. All right, peace.